My name is Chip Johnson. I'm one of the co-chairs of Mid-South Mayor's Council, and we host this event. And it went really well last year. We made a lot of new contacts and friends, and I'm expecting just as much this year. I am here to introduce our next speaker. It's Paulo Nunes Ueno. I'm close. He'll tell you how to do it in a minute. I want y'all to read his bio because I'm not going to read it. It looks pretty important. But I was talking to him backstage. They've got a fancy green room. I never get to go in a green room, so I felt pretty important back there. But we were talking, and I'm a real big proponent of getting people out on their front porches. I think it's a big deal. We've all built decks in the backyard now. We don't even know if anybody's home. And I think we're going to hear some of that from him. But the thing I got most out of this, as I introduce him, the thing that I think is more important than those things you're going to see on the bio, is that he lives what he talks about. The man built a sandbox in his front yard. He eats dinner out there in the front yard, not the sandbox. But I think that's what's important about him to me, and why his speaking to us today is going to be so important. He lives and does what he talks about, and getting out in your front yard and meeting your neighbors is so vital to community building. And as we all know, community development precedes economic development. So with no further ado, Paulo.
Can you all hear me? Oh, yeah. Okay, good. See, I've been here like 12 hours and I'm saying y'all already. The sandbox is actually not relevant to the rest of the presentation at all, but I was so excited by Peter's talk, and Mayor Johnson and I were talking in the green room, and so indulge me with this little story. My wife and I moved into this house and we decided it's hard to get to the backyard, so let's put the sandbox in front. And we don't really have the front, so we did it, well, just on the other edge of the sidewalk, the planting strip. And the kids in the neighborhood loved it. It was like a madhouse, like everybody loved it. Because of the sandbox, we got to meet every single person who lived on that block. And you know, as you may have heard, Seattle has this reputation of having the Seattle chill. But that really broke the chill, let me tell you. 3 months later, we got a letter in the mail that said, move that sandbox or pay a $500 a day fine from the city. So I thought, wow, that stinks. And I called the paper. And because I had a buddy who worked there, and it was a slow news day, and we were in the front page of the paper with this sandbox. And the story was syndicated in the AP, and it ran all over the country, and then the next day was a slow news day again, apparently, because there was a knock on the door, and we were in the news, on television, and we were on every single station. So Google my name and sandbox for the rest of that story. Today I'm going to talk about these kind of gnarly regional transportation collaborations and sort of get into the nitty-gritty of that. So a little bit about me. I started working at the transit agency in Seattle. And then I became director of transportation at a hospital, children's hospital in Seattle, and then I became the director of transit and mobility at the Department of Transportation in Seattle. And now I help campuses and organizations figure out their transportation stuff. So more about that. The challenge at Children's was, let's double the size of this hospital, but we cannot by any means double the amount of traffic. They would not allow us to do that. So we needed to figure out how to do that and how to change slides. So we came up with a plan. We set a goal. We said by 2030, we're going to have 30% of the people, only 30% of the people coming here who are staff, who are physicians, driving by car. And not incidentally, that had a lot of positive impacts for the people who live in the community and also for the hospital. It saved $25 million in parking capital costs. Reduced our impact on congestion a lot, reduced our emissions. So how did we do that? We brought all of these complicated pieces of the transportation system and tried to make them legible. So you put everything in one page. We created a system where the incentives are aligned so that you don't pay for parking a month ahead, you pay for parking when you use it. And when you use it, it shows up on the calendar. And when you don't use it, you can claim how you got there by bike, by walking, by bus, and you get a bonus. You get a recognition in cash money for not driving that day. Because remember, you're helping us save $25 million. Oh man, I'm having a hard time with this button. I better step over here. Okay, here we go. No. And taking a cue from the Fitbit, try to sort of reflect people's behavior back to them. Hey, Suzanne, great job. You biked more this month than last month. Is that possible? We optimize our shuttle system so that it would be an extension of transit. Transit is great. Last mile is often a challenge, so we used our shuttle system to do that. And of course, we gave people free bikes. So while this was happening, there was a major transit funding crisis in our region. And the county, which is the transit provider, put a funding measure out and it failed. The mayor immediately, 3 months later, put something else on the ballot just for the city of Seattle, and it passed. And then he said, I need to create a division in my department, which has never run transit, to run transit for me. And I was lucky enough to get that job. But I said, I think, so taking from my experience at Children's, that if we just focus on transit, that'll be a mistake. Let's get all of the pieces of this transportation system, the parking, the bike share, how do we coordinate with the new transit options, the new mobility options that people have, the Ubers, the Lyfts. How do we make these transit capital investments, not just the operational investments, work? And so we made the transit and mobility division inside of SDOT. And we put together a plan that would take the frequent transit network and from about 50% coverage of households to 72% of all households in Seattle within 10 years. And then after that, I've been helping organizations throughout the country to take a look at how do they orchestrate all of these different pieces of a complex transportation system to make them work more efficiently. Helping universities, did a project with the World Bank in Sao Paulo and in Mexico City. A couple of companies in Seattle whose do not disclose agreement, don't let me tell you their names. Coffee, maybe, online retailer. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about these really gnarly regional collaborations that I've been a part of, that I've observed, and one that I don't know personally, but I think all of these we can draw some lessons from here. You've heard about Seattle Boomtown, and it wasn't always like that. This is a famous billboard from the 1970s when Boeing was laying off people like mad. And now it's a really different story, as I'm sure you know. This is the new, essentially a new downtown called South Lake Union that's being created in Seattle, largely for Amazon. And the numbers speak for themselves. There are more cranes in Seattle now than there are in any other city in the country. So, terrific, great, growth, it's amazing. And at the same time, we have this little seismic issue with this Alaska Way viaduct, so we need to take it down. So that's causing some disruption on the surface. And we have a little tunneling project that's happening. That gives you a sense of scope of how big this thing is. This is the Alaskan Way Viaduct Deep Bore Tunnel project. And at the same time, we're trying to be a safer city. We're trying to be more welcoming to people of all modes and all abilities. And we're creating a bike system in downtown that's taking away lanes. And terrific, one of the regional transit providers has launched 2 new stations 3 months ago. We're going from 10-minute headways to 6-minute headways, and that's amazing. However, the bus tunnel, which is actually now a transit tunnel, shared light rail and buses, can't accommodate that much demand. So we're running trains through there every 6 minutes now. Every 3 minutes at the peak of the peak, all these buses have to go to the surface. So things are starting to get hairy. right? So this is the downtown bus mall. Carries a tremendous amount of people. It's super effective transportation infrastructure. Some issues with public realm that we have to address and we have to talk about. However, how do we get more buses up there? Because the trains are going to kick them out. How do you figure this out? And the time when transit in downtown Seattle is rocketing. It's the fastest growing mode. Downtown Seattle will not work unless we can get more people on transit to go to work there. That's period, end of story. It will not, as a place, it will not work. So, as a region, we had to ask ourselves, so how do you solve this when you have one transit agency to deal with, two transit agencies to deal with, a third transit agency to deal with, the state DOT, the King County government, the city of Seattle, and last but not least, here we are at ULI, are the property owners in downtown Seattle. This is one of those made for graduate school textbook problems of we're going to screw this up because these are too many people with too many agendas. Every single one of those folks has a different board. Every one of those folks has a different leadership. They all have different funding. They all have different priorities. They all have different staff. Sometimes their staff don't get along. What are we going to do? Well, I remember, incidentally, this is parenthetical. Once we had a visit from a guy who had a job very similar to mine at SDOT for the City of London. And he drew the org chart. And essentially, you have the streets, the underground, the river, the Thames, the airports, everything goes to the mayor. There's everything reports to one guy. And then we drew ours for him, and he goes, how do you get anything done? Because everybody has a different boss. So that's sort of what we're talking about today. So the very first thing in this particular project, which was called the Downtown Seattle Transit Coordination Project, which is not a very sexy name, is they got commitments. They said, we're going to draw up a charter, we're going to agree on some principles, and then we're going to get the top people at all of these agencies to write down on a piece of paper that we're going to work together. And then they created this organizational framework. And I was part of the executive committee up there. We met once a month. And I had staff then that were in each of these technical groups. So there were 8 technical groups, and they were staffed by the people from the 5 agencies. I had some staff that worked for me that were 25% of the time dedicated to some solving one of these problems together with these other agencies. Now, incidentally, nobody is paying for anybody else's project in this collaboration, right? Everybody's staying within their own swim lanes. I've got my budget, I've got my FTE, I've got my board, my principal to work to think about, which is the mayor. But the mayor said, Paulo, go do this. So in this collaboration, they went and they did something that I think is sort of a key thing. They said, we're not going to try to figure this out ourselves. We're going to go and hire a neutral facilitator. So they hired Jeannie. You see Jeannie up here in the corner. And she was there for the lifetime of that collaboration. She helped sort of untangle the fights. She kept people in their swim lanes, but she also pushed people together to try a little harder to find a solution. And so you start, and they started small. They said, all right, you're going to be figuring out the signal timing in downtown Seattle. You're going to be running the buses. You two are going to be talking together. How are you going to figure out signal priority for small things? But it takes an amazing, anybody here who's worked on traffic signals knows, it takes an amazing amount of coordination. And to get the lady who's figuring out signal timing and the guy who's figuring out how to run those buses around the same table, working together for a year, even though they're from different agencies, had great results. So all of this stuff then has led to a more significant collaboration called One Center City that is going on right now with the same stakeholders, where you have the 3 transit agencies, the state DOT, the city DOT, and the downtown property owners figuring out how to remake traffic patterns in downtown Seattle so that we can make a consistent experience for transit through there. So essentially what you're trying to do is to figure out, don't worry about anything from here over. This is the tunnel, by the way, where you see the tunnel at the top. It's shared with buses, and eventually there's going to be no buses on the tunnel. It's going to be just light rail. But are we going to have another transit mall on 5th Avenue? Are we going to have a two-way 6th Avenue? Are we going to have bike lanes on 4th Avenue? Or are we going to have bike lanes, a two-way bike lane on 4th Avenue? So this is a decision that sometimes a city will make and will throw over the wall, and then the transit agency has to deal with it. And then the property owners freak out, and then you actually don't get the project done because there wasn't enough process, there wasn't enough involvement. This One Center City project, again, everybody's in their own swim lane, everybody's paying for their own projects, but they're coordinating the investments and they're chipping in together for the shared analysis. And not for nothing, there is a really deep public engagement piece of this where there's an advisory group and they're putting things out like this to the public. Which one is going to work better? Which one of these solutions is going to work better for transit reliability? Which one is going to work better in terms of parking impacts? Which one are we going to be able to deliver in one shot? So it's one type of coordination where we're all sitting around the table, we have shared goals, we have a high level commitment, and we're accomplishing projects each within our scope. The second one is a type of collaboration where agencies go together and find a common funding source, and that keeps you at the table, and you deliver something that's really difficult that is maybe a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So a few years ago in the Seattle area, they applied for what was called an urban partnership grant to provide the 4 T's, transit technology, tolling, telecommuting, over the 520 bridge. So Microsoft is over on your left side of Lake Washington. A lot of Microsoft employees live on the west side. There's a very congested bridge there. The bridge needed to be replaced, and there was this opportunity to put some tolling on this bridge to pay for the replacement of the bridge, but also to do peak demand management. So this was a really difficult project to do with the state highway building outfit. WashDOT will say they're more than that, and they are, but that's their DNA. We have an amendment to our Constitution in the state of Washington that says you cannot use gas tax for anything but road, so you can't fund transit with any gas tax money. So as a DNA, the state DOT doesn't do transit all that well. But Transit King County was one of the partners, and then our MPO. So they went out, they got $155 million to do this project, and they were able to greatly improve transit in that corridor, improve the park and rides, improve some information to riders. They were able to buy additional buses, and Metro was able to add service at that. And then the technology piece is really cool, where they have dynamic management of the lanes, where you can have a lane that is at 40 miles an hour and the lane that's going at 55 miles an hour, and you're orchestrating the flow of traffic on that roadway dynamically. And really importantly, this was the first time in our state that we had tolling on any piece of road infrastructure, and it's worked really well. So the key takeaways from that is that partners linked arms, and they said, we're going to go together and apply for this funding. There was a legal structure there then that kept them together. And then they had a shared performance target. So together they were trying to improve the person throughput across that corridor. So regardless of how they were going to do it, whether it was going to be through the tolling or through transit, they were working together to meet that same target. I just threw there kind of just to be snarky, but out of that $155 million, the telecommuting piece got $0. But it was a part of the grant that they thought it was important. So the last, and I'll just sort of skim this piece of collaboration that's very different than is when organizations come together and form a whole new entity. So the Alameda Corridor in Southern California is a collaboration between the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, and the surrounding communities. And it was started with a planning effort. So similar to the conversations that you're having regionally here. And then they were able to, and it made sense for that particular situation, to create a new entity that was going to manage this 20-mile separated freight corridor that took an enormous number of freight of semis off the road and made the land use around those communities that were really impacted by emissions of that that corridor and that freight corridor as it was done before. Some people take issue in terms of whether the authority is actually penciling out as a business entity, but in terms of the sort of the environmental justice and the impact on communities there, it's an incredible win. So I've got some thoughts about collaboration that ways that you might start here that would be helpful maybe. And I think the first one is this idea of agreeing on vital signs. Medicine did this, hundreds of years ago. It's blood pressure and breathing and temperature and something else. I'm not a doctor. And together, doctors can look at a patient and say, yeah, this person's okay. No, this person's not okay. We need to go and do something drastic here. So what I'm suggesting is that you, as a region, come together and say, what are the vital signs of a healthy transportation system here? What are the indicators that say, all right, we're doing good. Are we winning or are we losing? And I've got some suggestions on what those might be. Equity, mode share, and the number of people seriously injured and killed in our transportation system. So I'll go over those really briefly. So equity is a very, very important thing for us to wrap our minds around, and it's very difficult. We have different definitions of what that might be. But I would really encourage you to take a look at this. This is from the Victoria Transportation Policy Institute. It's a paper that came out earlier this year. And it's a very, and again, it's for practitioners. It's a very practical breakdown of how would you track as a region, as a city, as a DOT, how would you track the distribution of costs and benefits of the work that you do? And it's very practical guidance. And I really encourage you to have, these are difficult conversations to have, but I encourage you to have these conversations. Are we talking equitably, as equity for us means that you get what you pay for? Nothing more, nothing less? Are we, is there equity along people's ability? Are we, where we have folks who can't drive or won't drive, either because they're too young or because they have a disability? How are we distributing the costs and impacts along social and economic divides? A really important conversation to have. So I encourage you to find ways, maybe through the ULI, convening this conversation. How do you as a region begin to speak and agree on the key metrics of how our transportation investments impact and benefit people in our region? The second one is what we call mode share. Mode share is just a very simple metric. It's just a distribution of how many people are using different modes to go to school, to go to work, to come to a particular region. It's very easy for us to look at our cities and roads and say, everybody drives. But then we remember that you have to be 16. You have to own a car. You have to be able to see. So there's a vast number of people out there who we take for granted because, like Peter was saying, it's very easy for us to say, "Ugh, reach into my pocket, grab my keys, and go." But if we start tracking, we'll have a better understanding of how is that health of the system in terms of how are we serving all of the people that are coming to a particular place. And then, really importantly, the number of people seriously injured and killed. So this is a really, really sad statistic. In the last 2 years, the number of people killed in our roads and highways in this country has gone up by 14%. There's a lot of reasons why. Actually, interestingly, seatbelt use seems to be on the decline. Who knows why not? Who knows why? But we lose 40,000 people a year who die in our roads. And there's about twice that many who are seriously injured. So if there's one thing that I leave you with today is that we ought to know what the numbers are. How do we know in Hernando? How do we know in Memphis? How do we know in our region whether we're doing better this year than last year? And more importantly, what are we doing about it? So I'm going to close out with a challenge. There's this thing that started in Sweden called Vision Zero, which is let's sit here and imagine 0 deaths from highway and roadway fatalities. What would it take? Well, number one, it would be, remember those signatures that I showed you? It would take a commitment. It would take a regional commitment to do this. And so what I'm encouraging you is that commit to tracking. Next year at this conference, let's just put all of our statistics up on the board and say, how did we do? Can't help people unless you know what their vital signs are, right? So let's just check, how are we doing? And then make a bold commitment. Let's reduce that by 50% in 5 years. What do we have to do that? And then go together and look funding together for this. So for the rural and small town mayors here, this is really sobering. Rural America comprises about 19% of the population of the country, but nearly 60% of the people that are killed in highway and road accidents get killed in rural and small town roads. This is shocking. I just found this out doing research for this. I don't think we can let this stand. We need to do something about this. It's shocking. So the last thing that I want to say is for mayors out there, for folks who work in public works, there's the FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, just put out what they call the STAR Guide, which is the Small Town and Rural Multimodal Network Guide, which is a really valuable document. Please go tell your Director of Public Works, your Director of Transportation, to read this and to make her staff or his staff read this, because it offers very practical, very useful guidance in terms of, Mayor Johnson was telling me about the work that he's been doing with Safe Routes to School and creating a linear park, and that stuff is not easy. There's a lot of oversight in this, and this will help you get through that a little bit easier, I hope. But it gives some very clear direction in terms of speed management, in terms of the different facility types, whether it's a sidewalk, a side path, and it features case studies of how cities were able to get funding and deliver this. So I want to thank you for having me, and I want to encourage you to lower that number of people that lose their lives or lose a loved one in our roadways every year by working together. Thank you.
I am supposed to tell you how this affects me in my little town and how I can take this message and move it to Hernando. And it may seem like a stretch. Everybody's saying, well, we know Hernando is only about 16,000 people, a veteran community of Memphis. But we have transit problems. I remember we've been requiring sidewalks in our town for a long time. And people would say, well, we don't need them on Commerce Street. And Commerce Street is our main street. You get off the Commerce exit and you ride into town on that big 5-lane street. And people would not want to put in sidewalks since we started mandating them. And their argument was, well, nobody's going to walk down that street. It's too busy. Well, that's not the right argument. The reason, why do you think they're not walking on that street? They're not walking on it because there's no sidewalks and the street's busy. So we've been mandating those sidewalks there for years. And of course, everybody says, why are you making me build a sidewalk to nowhere? It doesn't connect. Well, if you drive down Commerce Street now, there's probably about 200 feet that's lacking sidewalk. And we're going to hopefully get our board to fund that and fill in that gap. And all of a sudden, our main street in Hernando is going to have connectivity all the way into town via sidewalk. And we're starting to see many more people use it. So even in a small town, people want a different way to get around. We just put up a new traffic signal in front of the Kroger Marketplace. And everybody said, why in the world are you putting crosswalks and countdown timers in Hernando? Well, guess what? There were people darting across the street all the time. And now those people are walking another 50 feet down and crossing safely at that crosswalk. And I can see that more people are using it. We all have transportation problems, and especially Hernando, because we're so rapidly growing. I don't know if everybody realizes this. The I-69, I-55 interchange is in the city limits of Hernando. It's big. And there's about to be a 269 loop that's going to connect us to Collierville, and there's going to be 2 new exits there. So we're about to really see some new transportation things happening in Hernando. And we have to work on interstates, and we have to work on bike lanes. And you know, what are we going to do about bikes in Hernando? When I moved there was 1 bicyclist in town, literally 1. But now we've got a bike club. I mean, people drive from Memphis on Saturdays with their bicycles, unload on our square, and take a 25-mile bike ride. And so we have to make sure those people are safe. A lot of it is signage. We got a law enacted in Mississippi about 7 years ago, making people give a 3-foot wide berth when they pass a cyclist on a rural road. We put signs up all over the place. Some people don't like it, but it's a state law, and it's got top of mind awareness. We're making roads safer for cyclists. We also, like many places, the roads that were built in the 70s, we have these big wide roads, 50-foot wide roads through the middle of subdivisions, and people speed on them. Well, it's as simple as measuring in 6 foot from the curb on each side and striping bike lanes. That's easy. It's fairly cheap. And I was noticing you talked a lot about collaboration, all the people that have to be at the table. The last time the Community Foundation gave us a grant for striping some bike lanes, I said, here's where they need to go. You know, that's the mayor taking charge. And someone on my staff said, wait a minute, we got the bicycle club out there, let's ask them where they need to go. Well, the bike club came and said, here's where we really need them to go. I was wrong. Y'all are going to not hear me say that very often, but I was wrong on that one. So we do need to engage the partners who are affected. They know where they need the bike lanes. If we only have $5,000, they know where best to spend it. So we engage those people, and he was talking about our other sidewalk program. I don't know if y'all have heard of a Safe Routes to School program. We had this interesting, terrible situation actually in Hernando called hazard busing. It means we had these kids that live close enough to school to walk, but we send a bus to pick them up because it's not safe enough to walk. So we got this grant 9 years ago. So I'm kind of not happy with the federal bureaucracy on sidewalk grants, but literally today there are people pouring concrete on those sidewalks. And we're gonna have these kids be able to safely walk to their school on sidewalks. So that's transportation in a small town. You know, we are not gonna have a subway system while I'm mayor of that town, but it's gonna come one day, and we have to be preparing for intermodal. And one of the small ways we've done it, we built a new hotel in town. It's a big deal for us. We got a new Hampton Inn in town. But when they built it, we asked them to set aside some parking spaces for shared parking. So our citizens that drive to Memphis for their job can park there, meet their neighbor, and carpool into Memphis. And that's seeing some use. We've also asked them to put in 3 electric car charging stations. First one's in Hernando. It may sound crazy, but that's a big deal for us. So we're looking at different modes. And I think that's the message to smaller towns is don't think because you're just a small town, transportation can't be done or shouldn't be done. There are many ways to do it. So I could talk about transportation all day because it's near and dear to my heart. I'm a big pedestrian advocate. So if y'all want to catch me on the side and talk about those issues, I would be happy to. But in Hernando, we're proud of our town too. But we're also proud to be part of the Memphis metro area. We understand that we all need to be partners in this if we're going to grow together. And I look forward to going through the rest of this day and hearing the other speakers and working with y'all at the end of the day. Thank y'all.